My name is Rich Barlow. I am professor of drawing and painting here at Hartwick, although I'm on sabbatical, so some of you may not have yet have met me. Anyway, I'm here to introduce our guest lecturer for the evening, Piotr Szyhalski, who is an incredible artist from Minneapolis. He teaches at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. And I first became aware of his work back in the 90s when I lived in Minneapolis, and my bandmate at the time went to MCAD, and I remember seeing an exhibition that featured some of his work. I'm not sure if it was a faculty show or what, but it was in the MCAD gallery, and just thinking it was really smart, interesting work that plays with and comments on the sort of language of advertising and media and propaganda. And I remember immediately thinking this is an interesting artist. And I'm sure Piotr will tell us more about it, but his career since then, he's had a project ongoing for about 10 years now called Labor Camp. And that is digital, interactive, fine art. It involves music. And he's been showing this all over the country. He's had shows at the Museum of Contemporary Photo Chicago. He's in the collection of the Walker Art Center, the MFA Houston. He's been in shows at the San Jose Museum of Art. And I could go on. And perhaps he'll tell you more if you would like. But when we were thinking about this lecture series for the fall, one of the things we were really thinking about was, what kind of other voices we could bring in and how we could tie these lectures to things that are going on in our world right now. And one of the things that immediately came to mind for me was Piotr's new Labor Camp report project, which if you haven't seen it yet, I'd strongly advise you to check it out and follow it. This is an incredible project. He has been every day throughout the COVID pandemic creating a new handmade, hand-lettered poster that comments on or responds to the news of the day. And not only is he doing this every day, but each one is really incredibly well executed. The graphic design is incredible, the lettering is incredible. They're just really interesting, powerful series going on. And I just thought, because it speaks to both fine art and design, and our time, that he would be a great artist to have come talk to us. And I think it's also great to see how artists respond to the political issues of our day. And this is a great example of that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Piotr, and he will tell you more in, I'm sure, more detail and expertise than I have about his work. So Piotr,
all right.
Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks for this lovely introduction, and thank you for just saying something and not reading the unfortunate bio that circulates on the internet. And every time it happens, I'm thinking, oh my God, I gotta try to scrub this from the internet and put a different bio out there. And it's just because there's so much there that seems, I don't know. I'm not sure if I would be talking about this work today. Anyway, thank you for having me. Thanks for reaching out, and I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here to share with you some thoughts on the work. Actually, let me do the screen share first, and as we begin this. All right, are we there? Are you seeing my screen now, or it's just me? Yes. Okay. Very good.
Yes.
All right. So, as Richard mentioned, I am pretty sure that the reason why I'm here today is mainly the current project. It's the work that is still ongoing. I'm still very much in the midst of it. And so when I was thinking about what to talk about, I was wondering how to shape the talk, how to touch a little bit on the older work, but have enough time to talk about the current project, so that that reason for me being here is still part of the conversation. And so forgive me if the presentation is somewhat weirdly balanced, but I was trying to kind of do two things at the same time, give you a little bit of a sense of some other work, but also just be able to focus and maybe have a conversation, because it is still brand new work for me. I only talked once about that particular project in public, so it's always a process trying to figure out what you've done really, and organize your own thinking about the work, contextualize it properly, acquire a little bit of distance. Sometimes it takes time to really look at the work and critically, and be able to sort of assess things in a way. So I'm not there yet. I'm still in the middle of the work, and tomorrow I'm going to sit down at this desk again and continue on with the project. It's a very strange experience for me. I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But so anyway, bear with me. I'm gonna kind of plow through a lot of stuff at first fairly quickly to just give some background. Then I picked a couple of projects that I want to spend a little bit more time on that seemed relevant to the current COVID report projects. And then I'll end with that, and hopefully we'll have a conversation then. Sound all right? All right. So again, thank you for having me here. I'm going to very quickly just say that I do have a very diverse practice, meaning that over the last 3 decades or so, I really have worked with many different media, and just some random sampling of things. I spend about a decade plus of my time working on screens exclusively. So internet specific work that happened in the mid 90s when the internet just happened. I ended up, because of that, inexplicably working for MTV Online, working on projects for Bjork, for Smashing Pumpkins, for Busta Rhymes. It's a strange part of it. It was definitely a part of that screen-based work experience in the 90s. I happened to develop this project for the Walker Art Center, which was their first commission of interactive online work that's in their collection. So it was a significant moment for me in that particular moment in time. And then there's projects like this, sort of a screen-based interactive experiences. And it's really a random project that I selected to share with you, but it seemed relevant because it is loosely based on these massive stadium displays that you would see in like North Korean stadium, where people show these color cards and create these massive mosaics. In this case, I developed this touchscreen scenario where, as an audience member, you can design your own display that is then saved in a database and displayed on a loop along with other contributors, other audience members' displays. So there's a weird play about one and many relationship that I really liked in this project that is somehow, maybe because of this propagandistic landscape relevant to the COVID project that I'll be talking about later. I worked a lot with sound. The interactive experiences of the 90s led me to spending much more time with sound. I developed software to record and perform. I built these crazy objects that facilitate audience exploration of sound projects in the museum spaces. I released 2 CDs for various projects, sound projects, which then led me to paying a little more attention to events and performative spaces. Here's a really awesome photograph from Empty Words performance, one of the all-night kind of duration performative projects that I've developed over the years for the Northern Spark Festival in Minneapolis. I used this one because it is tackling a kind of an iconic image, right? So it's a Iwo Jima photograph, but it's emptied the same way that Cage empties the language, or as he says, demilitarizes the language, in this case, kind of emptying that iconic image. So part of the tackling of that historic language that is also present in the current project. This is from more recent sort of public installation performance. It's called Geophone in Cleveland. No, it's not in Cleveland. It was in Indiana. Sorry. And Geophone, you can see on the left these spotlights. Each highlights a portion of the big lawn. I buried audio speakers in the ground, and so in order to hear the sound, you actually have to lay down and listen to the sounds emanating from the earth. And for this particular iteration of geophone, those sounds were the sounds of public unrest. So I amassed this database of demonstrations, protests, skirmishes on the streets from all over the world, from different historical contexts. So there's a database of these recordings that play throughout the night, and every other speaker is a live performance of my musical material that I'm also performing out of a setup up on the hill over there. There's also installations. This is from Houston. These are all like very intensely sonic and technological spaces, but also dealing with very tactile materials as part of the events. This is a installation at Alma that you're looking at the two sides of the same wall, hole drilled through the wall, and there's a rope that is nutted on through a hole on that table on the left, and it's the same rope that is holding up the chairs on the other side. So the gravity essentially holds both pieces on the two sides of that wall. There's another installation for which I also developed these series of objects. Objects are a big part of my my practice as well, like these custom records. And I bring up this Apologia series because the graphic language that I explored when designing these labels for non-existent records is something that is very much present, I feel, in the current series as well. In many ways, I always say this now, that the current project, I've been practicing for this work basically my entire life. And there's not a single project from the past work that I can pick up and say that it doesn't some way affect or inform what I'm doing right now. So it's it's a pretty interesting sort of microcosm of ideas that congealed in this current moment. This is called the Search Party. It's this Google colored set of brand new shovels that are held by these chemical beaker holders on the wall, or these hybrid objects, instruments. I call them labor camp orchestra instruments that are sometimes present in the display as actual objects, other times as videos of just me holding the objects in a sort of motionless way. This is the screenshots from that video, or these small paper cut sculptures that are then photographed as tintypes and presented as this very traditional both media-wise and with a kind of cult of object attitude artworks. And then the most recent set of objects that I have done, and this is sort of like maybe a direct precursor to the precursor in the sense that it was the last sort of big project that I completed before starting on this COVID series, is the series of these plates. There's 26 of those. They're hand-painted vintage plates. So I just sort of shop for the plates and then just add the phrase "you work, you eat" to each one of those, trying to aesthetically work myself into existing kind of design, pick up on the either aesthetic or some compositional elements, or directly work myself into patterns that are already there, kind of a dialogue with the folks who designed the plates in the first place. So these are, I call those souvenirs, labor camp souvenirs, much like the kind of decorative plates that you would pick up in a souvenir shop if you visit I don't know, fancy lodge or a hotel. But in many ways, this was also directly a kind of a training, a reconnecting with my hand, my ability to render type with a brush, which is really what the current project is sort of thriving on. I love that process, and I think you can see that in this work, that there is definitely like a playful, maybe even joyful, despite the messaging, quality about the relationships between text and the images, the object, its function. Ideally, I would like to actually release these plates as proper dinnerware. So the ideal presentation of this work for me would be to imagine a family having a dinner and actually eating food off these plates, and when they were done with the food, the message would reveal themselves. That would be like the proper presentation of this material. Exploring a kind of different textural and typographic approaches, but maintaining kind of cohesion of the work as a whole. Something that I think a lot about working on the covet piece right now. So those were sort of a quick outline, some objects, some various older projects. I want to share with you two sort of larger multidisciplinary pieces where different sort of influences are converging. This is from the 3 Factory Pieces exhibition at the Soap Factory. And what you're looking at is one of the 3 galleries. I'm going to talk about Gallery 1 in a little bit, but this is the furthest or the deepest space in the gallery. And in that exhibition, it was, to me, the sort of quietest space, in the sense that the way that the text, for example, operates in that space is very subdued to me. You can see the counterpart to the brand new shovels of the Google that I showed you earlier. In this case, these are old shovels. I collect shovels that I built these custom caskets for, and there are different shapes to kind of house these unique objects. And then the text you see on the floor is hand rendered in 40-some pounds of salt that is distributed on the tar paper applied directly to the floor. So they're handwritten letter forms in loose material using this spackle. The idea being that as the audience explores the exhibition, slowly with each step, the text begins to be erased and or interacted by the audience in this particular fashion. So kind of a before and after situation. But again, text, a role of typography or place of typography, a hand lettering, those are elements that I tend to come back to in different situations quite often. Permanent labor is another one of those all-night, 9-hour, overnight durational events, which combined a number of things: actual physical labor, dance, ad hoc vocal performances, and printed matter. So I also designed this strange visual score for folks to perform fragments from Lazaretto's essay on immaterial labor, which actually turned out to be quite a lovely situation, with lots of people kind of chiming in and articulating, voicing these ideas in the space, in the bowels of the performative space. I think I have a couple of videos to kind of briefly show you maybe just a bit of the action. 12 tons of dirt, things to dig in physically and intellectually. And 9 hours of nonstop percussion, which that was for me a highlight of the performance. And so part of that event was also live printing of these posters. We're working all the time posters that are definitely a through line through a lot of my my projects. And these posters are often associated with live printing during performances, right? So there is this connection between a live event and the printed matter that is very important to me, and something that does definitely is present in a number of projects. There is a number of editions of these posters at this point. To me, it's in a way the same poster that continues to reimagine itself, or I tend to it in a way that I am maybe updating its appearance, right? Trying to keep it relevant. I like to think about the current project too as something much larger than me, and I'm just there to maintain it and upkeep it, so to speak. This is a slightly different version, a larger version of We're Working All the Time messaging, but I decided to include it here because aesthetically, or at least in terms of formal language, again, it connects to the COVID series. And I think this is the most recent edition of the We're Working All the Time poster that visually takes cue from the big banner project that I'm going to talk about in just a couple of minutes. But before, this is actually a big We're Working All the Time banner on the outside of the soap factory. So I'm going to get back to the banners in a moment, but I also just want to very briefly touch on leaflets. Leaflets are, very dear format to me. I love the fact that there's this piece of paper that is particular size, that operates very specifically in the airspace as it's dropped from the airplanes. And I love the fact that this particular set of properties describes a piece of paper that had been weaponized over the decades of the use. Even this day, we are still using leaflets as a psychological operations device or a weapon. So I've been designing leaflets for decades. Leaflets and the poster formats are definitely kind of mainstays. And so these are some of the really old pieces from the past, just to give you a brief look at some of the language of these small pieces of printed ephemera. I always love the implied sort of ephemeral quality of these pieces of paper. And for example, like this one, so what you see here is almost a reprint of one of the coalition forces leaflets that was designed for use in Iraq, where on one side you'd see the dinar note with Saddam's portrait on it, and on the back it would say, "Honor will never be regained, no matter what the cost is." And I basically designed an American equivalent of that with our currency and the simple translation of this message. This is one of the examples of the leaflets that have become sort of their own project in a way, articulating the reality in the US as also a front in this particular conflict. So trying to reflect the material that we're distributing in Iraq on the home front. So these are a couple of photographs of these machines that I ended up building as a substitution for dropping leaflets from the airplane. This is one project that I am. It's like one of the dream projects that I always try to do, and I was not able to execute yet. I want to do a proper leaflet drop from the airplane, right? Design something for that moment in time, and it almost happened in San Jose. But then in the last couple of months before the project, that decision was undone, and it prompted building of these machines that would dispose the leaflets in the public spaces. So I'm sort of happy because it prompted this particular construction of these devices that very slowly churn out these leaflets every 3 minutes or so as a kind of a substitution. But if you know of anybody who's interested in facilitating airplane drop of leaflets, let me know. I'd love to be able to do that. So I'm just skipping around for the... all right, so from leaflets, I'm going to get back to the soap factory, to the gallery 1, where a counterpart to this quieter salt piece was present. These were these massive print projects. And because of the banner project, because of the interest in posters and leaflets, I am sometimes referred to as a printmaker. And I really don't consider myself a printmaker, really. But I do a lot of print work. And this crazy, massive contraption was built as this sort of grotesquely oversized letter press, I guess, if you will. I cut the full set of letters that then would allow me to print any kind of messages. These particular texts that you're seeing in the space there are printed on this 4 streams of this material sewn together in the gallery. These texts had been written as a kind of response to the Occupy Wall Street movement. And I was just sort of really disgusted by the situation that was unfolding in the spaces in front of Wall Street, police brutalizing people while people sipping champagne and laughing at the situation from the balcony. So I wrote these angry messages, not knowing what to do with them. And years later, when that exhibition happened, it became an opportunity to kind of bring that text back. The project since had taken a number of forms. You're looking at images from different galleries where the project has been articulated. Most recently, actually, no, it's not the most recent articulation of it, but in the Bellevue Art Museum outside of Seattle. And so in this iteration of the project, I print the entire set of the messages, the text on the left of the screen, one letter at a time. At the end of that cycle, we cut this this massive long banner out, and we take it out for what I call a walkabout with the message. So the best sort of articulation of this work is, to me, what it becomes a kind of a cross between a protest banner and a news sticker. The slowly scrolling text at the bottom of the screen seems like so much of the. This is a good video that gives you a sense of scale of this thing, so you can see it sort of traveling down there on the side of the street. So much of the news content today becomes a protest material almost immediately, that this idea of having both of these things unfold simultaneously seemed very appropriate and in the moment, so to speak. So there's the them as my messaging, the text, but there's also this flip side of this project that I want to talk to you a little bit about very briefly. So right after the opening of this exhibition in the Soap Factory, Jamar Clark was murdered in Minneapolis, and the very next morning a protest was being organized. I saw messages about this on Facebook, and I posted what you see here, simply saying on the same thread that was announcing the protest that I'll just be going to the factory and I can print banners for the protest if people tell me what they want the banners to say, right? So by the time I got to the factory, people started sending specific messages, and a couple of people showed up to help with the process of printing. We started printing the banners. People started showing up to pick up the banners. Then we started seeing those banners on the streets, posted back on the social media. So this kind of loop closed. And I bring this part of the project up because since then it became, I think, if not equally important, perhaps more important part of this work. To me, it's still the same project, the same as them with the text that I had written that are being printed in the gallery, then walked outside, the news sticker, protest banner balance. But here, all the messages are messages that I simply use this artwork device as a way of maybe amplifying, enlarging, or facilitating a delivery of these messages through this work. And so my favorite aspect of this situation is that it's an example of the work that the audience took ownership of, and not just as something that people sort of felt connected with, but literally, physically took ownership of, and it became a utility, a kind of a social service, if you will. I like to think about it as a service. So there's some of the images from the variety of protests. I still receive requests for new banners, and I try to print as many of them as possible. At this point, I must have made thousands of these individual impressions, and the banners went everywhere in the country. I shipped them. If people request these things locally, my favorite way to work on this is I simply invite those folks to help me print those banners. And so these micro communities emerge around the process of articulating those messages together. So there are moments where I would end up spending 3-4 hours printing banners with a family that is going to march in an anti-gun rally. Those are the moments where something very unique emerges from sort of the inside of the work that articulates maybe an idea of community in a very different way. So uh, that brings me to the current project, which, not exactly sure exactly how to talk about it just yet. But there are several sort of approaches to this. As Richard had mentioned, is something that happens every day. As you can see in this photograph, I'm in the same space. This is my small table that I ended up starting to work on here. I do come up here every morning, super early, 5:30 a.m., and read a bunch of articles, try to take a temperature of what happens, not just on the outside, but also for me as a human being, and kind of articulate that moment somehow. So most of these images end up being, oh, I have a few videos of me actually painting these. So they're all painted with these refillable Kuretake brush pens. I happened to had one when I sat down here to make the first drawing. I had one of those brushes I bought some years ago, not because I was particularly like excited about the tool. I was curious about this, and I haven't done much work with it. This project is by like exponentially more intense use of any tool that I've ever used than anything else. I mean, I was unprepared for it, but that was the tool that was here, and that became kind of one of the factors that defined the aesthetic language for the entire project. So I posted these images on Facebook, a little bit like what happened with the banners, and the conversations began, exchanges with folks around the drawings, the ideas, the shared experience of quarantine. Something about those conversations uh, encouraged me to continue posting. I managed to stay afloat on this sort of daily updates of the process. I didn't have all that much paper in the very first days of this, and I thought that maybe I was going to be done with the first 7 drawings because that's how much paper I had. But when people started offering to send me paper because they wanted me to continue with the project, I started sort of slowly realizing that there was a different kind of connection that was happening between me and other folks on the other side of the screen. That there was something a little more intimate, I think, in a way that people, and I'll say it again, took ownership of this project. I said earlier that this idea of me tending to it, the way one tends to a garden, is kind of present, or maybe progressively more and more present for me in this process, in the sense that I am now, I think, at 170 some. I'm not sure exactly what the number is right now, but so that's pretty big for a series format. And I love series as a format. I've always worked with series. You must have noticed this already: series of posters, series of leaflets, series of plates, objects, etc., etc. I love the opportunity to explore different avenues, different ways of interrogating subject matter, to explore like the capacity of the formal language that I'm utilizing. But 170 some pieces in a series should be sufficient to do these explorations. Well, this beast is different somehow. There are so many sort of intersecting elements that are taking place within it, that I fear maybe that there isn't really a clear point for the project to be truly resolved, or like to arrive at the point within the series where you feel like I've exhausted this material. So obviously, I think that the project still deals with the pandemic. The project is called COVID-19 Labor Camp Report, and in maybe early days of the project, the focus on those issues was much more direct. But as we sort of understood the situation a little bit more, with a little more complexity, the intersecting problems or intersecting issues became more and more important, and our awareness of those of that, you know, set of relationships that are at work, and the pandemic as a kind of platform or device or a set of circumstances that helps us focus our attention on these on this plethora of problems became a little bit more apparent. And so I even if the pandemic does in fact um, wane in a ways where it becomes less of a challenge on a day-to-day basis, I feel like there is the material of all the other problems that one way or the other intersected within the pandemic space, like the uprising, which happened in the midst of all of this. So it was definitely a moment of realizing, okay, there's one thing that is at playing out, but there's this other thing here, and the two are suddenly the same thing, right? How do you reconcile those tensions? How do you pay attention to both simultaneously? How do you make sure that the complexity of the situation is not lost on our attention of one aspect of the dynamic that is playing out? So I'm always looking for these points of intersection. I think I'm looking at the essential work image on the left. It's a good example of how sort of both of these ideas coexist in a very very specific, very direct way, but allowing us to maybe get a little bit more of a balanced bearing on those complexities I'm talking about. So I'm just sort of quickly skipping through a selection of some first of the drawings. I'm not going to skip through all 170 or whatever. I would suggest that if you're interested in the project, that as Richard suggested, head to Instagram. Labor Camp on Instagram is really the best way to, I think, experience the project as it is right now. That is kind of its original home. That's how those original conversations sort of emerged. I do also post on Facebook, but something about the architecture of that particular social media platform makes it a little less obvious that there is this continuity. Instagram has the grid view that allows you to understand the kind of scope of the scale of the project. So I'm going to skip through these fairly quickly, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about these encounters, I call them, because ever since I started on the project now, some institutions begin to reopen and other opportunities for presentation of the work emerged. And so this is from the Rochester Art Center. It's the very first presentation of the project in print form. So these are 2x3 feet posters printed and wheat pasted to the wall of the gallery. So poster as a language, visual communication language, is very important to me. This is something that has been present in my kind of I say creative or artistic life in its entirety. This is one of my first sort of points of inspiration and motivation to pursue that kind of work, and in my youth back in Poland, and obviously something I'm still working on. So I love the fact that the size of these prints, the wheat pasting, somehow brings that street ephemerality and acknowledges the public space. This is a different way of sort of articulating this idea at the Minnesota Museum of American Art in St. Paul, the museum that was still under lockdown, but decided to wheat paste those posters to the street-facing windows on the outside. Love thinking about it, of the work as sort of occupying the skin between the museum space and public space that is happening in this particular presentation. And then this is a few photographs from Baltimore where the posters ended up simply functioning the way that they should be functioning in a public space. Again, wheat pasted to these electrical boxes all over the city. So very quickly, a few themes. I'm just gonna rattle through this, and hopefully we'll get to the conversations in just a couple of minutes. I'm checking the clock here. So in retrospect, oh yes, is there a question?
Um, uh, I was able to see the stuff that you were showing, but I all of a sudden can't see it now. I just see you. I don't know what happened.
I'm not
So
sure.
I can't see the thing, the slideshow.
Is anybody else having this problem?
Ole, did you maybe click something in your Zoom? If you go to the top right, you'll see a little box inside another box. You might be able to click that and it'll flip back.
Uh, yeah, I'm not sure.
Maybe try to log out and log back in. Log back in. It might
Okay.
reset things.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Sorry, I didn't mean
everybody
to.
else can see this.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So what was I talking about? The themes. So at some point, once we started working on plans for a book printing of the project, I took a moment to kind of look back at the piece and maybe try to begin to formulate some language around what is really happening in the series. And so I identified some of these themes that exist, and visual themes like the homes, obviously something that was very present and important as a opportunity to redefine for us what home or house or household really is these days. Lots of hands everywhere in these images. A visual device that is very present in a lot of political work. And there's some hands that are always marked with the dollar sign cufflinks. So those are the hands of the regime. There's phones everywhere. So much of that experience of pandemic and everything else that was happening around or continues to happen is an experience that we are having through the phones, or the phones facilitating those experiences. Coffins, pandemic as a way for us to confront our own mortality, or have to acknowledge it in a very different way that perhaps we haven't been able to up to this point, or perhaps we sanitize that experience from our lives effectively. And I like these archetypal coffins that can allow me to talk about these ideas, but maybe with just a hint of a distance, a graphic distance that this visual language allows. And then fire, that at first was a kind of a metaphorical fire in the breathtaking image on the left, that slowly became literal fire of the uprising. And then in some of the recent drawing, the fires that are seem to be consuming the West Coast, and fires of the climate change. And then there's a kind of genre that developed within the project, this snake oil advertising language that somehow felt natural for these kind of crazy pronouncements of the regime. There's the diagrams, a kind of a language that offers imaginary illustrations to either government documents or documents that one would expect to be present as part of the cultural discourse around the pandemic. There's this genre of the some old white man orgy with lots of cash floating around, and booze, and generally despicable acts being committed. There's other issues that quickly presented themselves. The whole idea of economic inequities, money, nature, and environment as an important sort of theme that makes itself present in so many of the reports. And then there's the police brutality that we were so ostensibly reminded of again and again, that led to the uprising and the protests that continue to this day. And then there's the propaganda itself, and this is a language that I adopted for this series, partly because in this series I am observing and reflecting a political landscape, and like with all my work, and perhaps you've seen this in other projects, I try to make the decision about the formal language an important one. Not every idea can be articulated with the same medium. In fact, the opposite I feel is true. For every idea, there's one particular medium that is needed to give this idea the best possible form. And so this is one of the reasons why so much of the work is pushing in different formal directions. Well, this language of poster and propaganda specifically seems particularly important when I am reflecting the political language or the landscape of political space. So devices that fists, the V, such a huge theme in political and war posters, feet smashing things, the fingers pointing at people, the hush message to prevent spies from picking up on our messages, these stacks of profile, especially in communist propaganda. So a number of very direct references or connections that saturate the entire work with that sense of political set of political language discourse properties. And then some of the kind of interplay between the posters, like the detail of the vote ballot in the first poster just beginning to catch fire, and you can see in the middle poster the one of the pieces has that singed edge that obviously was extinguished and is still being cast. The mix of hands, raised hands, picking up on the visual themes from the essential work. So the series is now vast enough that for me to be able to develop these micro narratives within it. I guess, so this is pretty much the end of my presentation. I end with this small banner that was part of the THEM project that I developed some time ago, basically as a reminder to do your job and vote. And I will tell you that I personally want to plead with you to vote because I can't. I am not an American citizen. I'm here. I've lived in the States for 30 years. I'm a legal alien, green card carrying one. I pay taxes. I operate as any other citizen, except for the fact that I can't vote in this country. So maybe there is an element of a sense of urgency and kind of civic duty that motivates me to do the work that I do because I don't have this device at my disposal, but you do, and I hope that you will take advantage of it in this upcoming election. So I mentioned Instagram and Facebook, same handle, Labor Camp on both situations. And with that, I would love to answer any kind of questions that you guys might have for me.
So at the moment, I see one question here saying, these images invoke the proletarian revolution. Do you see current events as invocative of a similar movement taking place today? How do you foresee the differences of that revolution to introduce the communist state in juxtaposition to the alluded to resistance to the current regime, and particularly how your art interacts with that?
Wow, wonderful. I will say that, so I will start by simply saying that, so I was born in Poland and born and raised in Poland and came to United States in 1990, just at the cusp of, in Poland, the first democratic elections after effective overthrow of their communist regime. So I do have this other experience also, and it's a lived experience for me. And I have to tell you that one of the, I think, saddest really realizations for me over the years was that indeed leaving Poland was not leaving behind the world of corruption, leaving behind the world of oppression, leaving behind the world of social injustice that I hoped perhaps would be the case. Very quickly, in fact, this is at the time when I was coming here for the first time, this was the time of the first Iraq War. found myself on the street in Chicago in the midst of the protests with thousands of people on the street and police on horses and kind of a pandemonium experience, which was shocking, really shocking to me, because I felt that I just left that reality behind. And so the cracks in that illusion of the promised land that for so many people out in the East Bloc back then, perhaps still, the America always was this promise of a very, very different life, different world, really, that is possible, right? Well, I have to say that the last few years not only kind of totally obliterated that notion for me personally, but I continue to be really shocked at the fact just to what extent the dynamics that I see here now are reenactments, really, of the same dynamics that that I could see back in Poland, but also just from studying history. A lot of my work really focuses on what I would describe extreme historical phenomena. So I do pay attention to these big events, historical events that then seem to carry an impact over the years, and continue to affect events for generations sometimes to come. We just passed the September 11th anniversary, and it's one of those examples of what I would consider extreme historical phenomenon, an event that to this day somehow propagates through time, through culture, through society. I like to think about these in a way, the same way that the sound propagates through air, the particle pushing against each other and propagating these ideas through time in the case of those historical events. And I do feel that we are in the midst of one of those events right now. And so the way that, for example, Labor Camp Orchestra in the past, or a lot of Labor Camp work is about these events from the past, the COVID reports are doing this in real time. And that's sort of like a slightly different dynamic at work. But yeah, to bring it back to the question, I definitely see these parallels. And so part of my decision to be really direct about some of the language that is visual language, or this sort of visual strategies or conceptual strategies in these posters that are specifically either utilizing propaganda devices or allude to or connect to particular artifacts from a different historical context. That decision is motivated by that realization that we are indeed reenacting some of those dynamics, like to the T. And this is that's a frightening realization, but a one that I think maybe they're in the kind of grim picture of it. There's maybe a grain of hope. This is, I'm going to read you this little quote I have here that I like to bring up in this conversation. This is from the book called One Man's Bible by Gao Xinjian. It's one of the memoirs that were published, memoirs about life under Cultural Revolution. And, you know, Cultural Revolution is about as great an example of this extreme historical phenomena as you can get, because it is extreme in many ways. I read many books on the subject and the memoirs from the time period, partly because I wanted to understand the extreme end of the sort of communist spectrum, right? That was the extreme articulation or perversion of these ideas. Okay, so here's the quote. "It is very likely that when people have forgotten about it will make a comeback. And people who have never gone crazy will go crazy. And people who had never been oppressed will oppress or be oppressed. This is because madness has existed since the birth of humanity, and it is simply a question of when it will flare up again." I love that quote because in many ways it speaks to what the question was. I think we are witnessing this flare-up of madness. I mean, he uses that word in relation to the Cultural Revolution, because truly mad things were happening in that context. But by so many standards, I could talk about what we are witnessing or experiencing today in exactly the same terms. So definitely a flare-up of the madness that tends to present itself in different contexts, different times, different cultures. And this is no exception.
So we've got several more questions coming in. I'm going to try to ask them all and try to combine them if I see any that seem similar.
Mm-hmm.
The first of these is, are there any other artists that also work in the topic of propaganda that you take inspiration from or maybe have collaborated with? And somebody else asked, what influenced you to make art in the first place? So maybe these are related kinds of questions.
Yeah. I don't know. I will say that this is maybe an opportunity for me to say this about the whole propaganda bit, because I do want to say that this project is very different for me. This project is this, and maybe the banner them was a kind of a lead up to this, where I felt that I had to articulate what I had to say in a very direct, very forceful way. I think that I was just talking to somebody about this the other day, that notion of youths being radicalized as a result of exposure to whatever material online. I feel like I've been radicalized by this experience of last few years, and certainly the experience of last few months, in a way where I really feel like I had to make this decision, this choice, that the time for subtlety and complexity had to be set aside for a moment. There were very real, very dangerous things happening. They are still happening. And I felt a sense of responsibility as an artist to participate and contribute in as constructive and meaningful way as I can. I think we all need to work towards that end in this situation. And so that's where the project ultimately, how it took its form and why it continues to operate in this moment. So is it related to my growing up in Poland? Probably. I have definitely witnessed and understood the language of, for example, poster design as a very active, living space for artists or designers to be present in the public space, the space of public discourse, which at that time in that place was a street. So I feel that there is a sense of like organic understanding of that, and which is maybe why for my entire career I was always interested in alternatives maybe to a sort of traditional museum space or gallery space, and always looking for these ways of engaging with the public in a different way. Would I have thought that somehow Instagram or Facebook will become like a meaningful and important platform for my work? Absolutely not. But somehow the context of the pandemic and the lockdowns not only facilitated that, but actually allowed me to formulate the work in a way that, became really, I think, meaningfully integrated in a sense of community, and certainly in a sense of shared experience, global shared experience.
So I see a couple questions here that seem like they'll segue out of that pretty well. So one person asked, how did you come to finalizing these design choices that you use for your posters?
Quickly.
Yeah, it must be, right? And then goes on to, and this is maybe about the physical versus digital. Why did you choose prints as a medium for these messages rather than using digital posters? And what do you want people to get out of these posters when they're put up in public spaces? And I'm gonna maybe combine that too with one other question that came in, which was asking why you chose to take a satirical approach with these posters. So less formal and more, I guess, conceptual.
Satirical. It's interesting. It's not the first time this word is sort of mentioned. I mean, honestly, I know there is a sense of maybe a satirical distance, or maybe there's definitely a sense of humor in a lot of these designs for me. And it could be a dry and dark humor, but it's there. But then there's a lot of them that are really, I would not be thinking about them as satirical commentary. I think they're just, I mean, so during the talk, I think at the end of last year, I was happy with myself for being able to formulate a thought about my relationship to what is referred to as political art. And, you know, I really hate that term, and I really think that it flattens the whole idea of what work or how the work is being discussed once it's labeled as political art. And so I said that I don't do political art. I'm not really interested in it in that way, but I do make work that concerns itself with politics. And the thing that I liked about it is I said the way that a landscape painter concerns themselves with landscape, I concern myself with politics. I find a point of relationship to that space and articulate that. I reflect, I witness, I record, whatever word you want to use. That's the degree of political in the work. Now, with the Covet series, I know that boundary might have gotten a little fuzzy in the sense that, like I said, some of the messages are so directly confronting not just political space, but political forces, I guess, that are at work right now. But that's the urgency of the moment that sort of took over. And the lessons from the Banner project, with the way that, you know, my message was one thing, but there was also the importance and the urgency of all these other voices, all these other messages that somehow I happen to be in a position to facilitate, to embolden or amplify somehow. It was a humbling lesson to realize that, you know, the work actually has this capacity that I might have not noticed in it in the first place. So I try to be kind of tuned into these things these days and pay attention to how the work interfaces with other folks. How does it negotiate space between us, between me and other people, between other people? You know, the way the work is shared online is a good example of that, because people take what I put forward and at some point realize this actually reflects the way I feel, the way maybe I position myself in the world. And so I'm going to pass this on, not unlike the banners that I print for other people, and they carry them as an expression of their viewpoint, right? So there's something about the importance of being present and deeply engaged with the moment that I think maybe, hopefully, begins to build a little bit more informed, empathetic space where we can really be concerned about another human being's emotional space, where we can maybe start building connections that are outside of that political mess that just is determined to divide us in every which way possible. I don't know.
So, I think, you know, that answers some of what happens with the materiality of
the print,
how it enters space. And I see we have a couple other questions.
Richard, let me just address this, because I think somebody asked, why did I choose the prints? I want to say that these are actually not prints, they're drawings. They're ink drawings. That's why I included that video to show how they're made. I know they look like posters, and in the end I ended up printing them so that they can be posted on the street and in the galleries. But really they are drawings, and this is one of those things that, this is what I meant when I say this is a work that I do as an artist. I picked up ink and brush, and I sit here with a piece of blank paper and I make a drawing. Now, it happens to have letter forms that congeal in the form of words that perhaps introduce messages, that they have images, that in relation to those words construct new messages. That's the language that I chose to use for this project because it concerns itself with that political space. And that is a language that had been part of that space for many decades. So it seemed not just relevant, but actually important to use this language in this current moment.
Great. So yeah, we have a couple other questions. I mean, again, we're focusing quite a bit on the COVID reports right now.
Right.
But I think one of the things that was very clear from your presentation is how wide-ranging your interests and approaches are, and the different media you've used. And so we have a couple of questions here. One is asking what made you decide to use salt for the words in the soap factory piece. And another student is asking, what is your favorite medium to work with and why? And are there any media that you haven't worked with yet that you would like to? So I don't know if you can answer both of those sort of related questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the whole thing about media is that, I don't think I have a favorite medium. And this is, or my favorite medium is the brush pen and ink at the moment, because I just happen to be completely sort of submerged in it right now. But no, I don't. And I also, as a teacher, I always insist in conversations with students that, like, there's no such thing as style. If there is style, it's about how you think, how you process information, how you construct your language. That's where the style is not like the choice of medium or material, or what, at least to me it isn't, right? So I think that the work is an evidence of that. And what I said earlier, that I feel like each message can be articulated best in one particular way, and if you can identify that and then go that way, work with these materials, this medium. This is a reason why I've been sort of pulled in so many directions over the years, and why maybe ultimately, and why the work is so diverse formally and materially. So it would be really, really difficult for me to pick a favorite. There isn't. But somebody pointed out to me that text is very present in my work, no matter what material language I use. And so I didn't think about it in that way, but there's something about text that maybe is, so I don't know, text is, can I say it's a medium? Maybe, in a weird way. Text and letter form has been present in vast majority of the work. So there's something to be said about that, which maybe brings me to the salt piece. Why salt? Well, I will tell you that before it was salt, I also considered sugar. And one of the reasons, well, there were a number of reasons. Obviously, there are both white loose materials, so that was part of the concern for the articulation of the writing. I wanted it to look like sort of very traditional black letter calligraphy writing on the floor, right? So it needed white material. Flour was definitely too fine, too loose, would be too difficult to work with, and so it was either sugar or salt. And I kind of liked the sugar because I thought it was a very somehow like the relationship between sugar and tar and asphalt paper was so bizarre, like the completely like incompatible worlds were working together. And so that was definitely one of the considerations at first, but we were talking a lot about this was in the winter, people would be tracking snow, and sugar would be melting, become a sticky mess, and who knows what. And so part of the conversation went towards salt, and I'm so glad it did, because metaphorically or like in a symbolic way, the idea of working with salt feels so much more powerful. I mean, this is one of those examples of work kind of in many ways, or the choices emerging from the moment, from the process. This was that's how I arrived at the salt in that space. being open to those to that conversation with materials is huge for the process, you know. And I teach ideation and process class this semester, and I talk about this conversation with materials to students all the time. It is important to be aware of it, that it is a dialogue, that it's a back and forth, and kind of being open to your own like preconceived notions about what the material means, what it is, versus what it in physical and tactile experience, what it has to offer.
That's great. I see that Leah has posted saying she has a question, so I presume she would like to ask that herself. So
All right.
I'll turn it over to Leah to ask.
Thanks. I'm going to go back to the posters for a minute. I was really struck by just that you mentioned using Instagram and Facebook sort of as a platform and almost part of the work, and how you were sort of using the grid in Instagram to show all the posters together in sort of the series. And one thing I've noticed about the posters is how you photograph them. And you know, there's a million ways you could do that, but you always do it with someone holding them, and it's just, it's almost like eerie to me. Like it's sort of the anonymous citizen or the worker, the person that's making it. And I wasn't sure if that person was the maker, but just really interested in that sort of, it's almost like a frame of the poster of each one. And then when you see it in the grid, it's like, it builds the grid, you know,
Totally.
around your work.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could talk about that,
Sure.
that choice a little bit.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you asked. My daughter Ava holds the posters for me. We've done this routine now for 170 some days in a row. I mean, it's kind of incredible, really. And she always asks me if I talked about her in the talk. So this is great. Thanks for reminding me. She'll love to hear that. But no, you're absolutely so right. And I can't say that there was a master plan at work from the first drawing for the rest of the series. Absolutely not. It was very organic. The first drawing and the process of photographing it in that space was something that I honestly didn't think too much about. I asked Ava to hold the poster for me on the porch because the light was better than anywhere else in the house, so I can photograph a relatively neutrally lit piece of paper, right? And because of the square frame of the Instagram, I thought, oh, this is fine. And plus, I like the domestic context. You know, this, after all, we are under lockdown. And I think if you look at the beginning of the series, the first 2 or 3, it's just her holding the paper with her bare hands. And it was Eva's idea to put the gloves on and then the mask, because these things became more and more part of that reality, and then the pair of blue gloves and the blue mask became this sort of constant that carries this ritual through. And it was actually kind of amazing. There were a lot of people asking me questions about the stuff that's happening on the porch. You know, like they would notice, oh, was there a cat in there, or what is that on the table? It was totally fascinating, and a lot of people actually commented in a way, I love the fact that this is happening on your porch, that it's always inside the house. So very quickly I became quite aware of that domestic space being like an important part of the experience. You know, the grid is one thing, but also both the being on the inside of that domestic space, but full PPE, right? The surgical gloves and the mask still observed. So we're really proud of that, and I don't know. We'll see how long the project continues, but I think the format will remain. We're still stuck with each other here.
Thank you.
So we have another question coming here, and you said just now how long the project will go, and that comes up in here. So it's a 2-part question. You accompany your daily drawing with a commentary that alludes to the multiple references that provoked that day's drawing. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what you intend by sharing those internal musings, words in themselves alongside those in the drawing itself, but more questioning sometimes? And then part 2, how will you bring this series to an end? What are you thinking will be the appropriate moment to stop making them?
I don't know. I don't know. Um, well, let's see. So yeah, there are a number of things that are happening kind of in parallel with the drawings themselves. I have been sort of not documenting, again, not like in a premeditated way, but I started photographing some of the sketches for the drawings because I realized that there were ideas sort of surrounding what my final choice was that, I don't know, I sometimes liked a number of things that I could have drawn, right? Like, but I only had the time to make one of those drawings, and I thought, oh, I can use the stories in Instagram. And again, something about the platform that facilitates this parallel track. I can just keep the drawings in the proper posts, and the stories, the more ephemeral stuff, can kind of pass by in a 24-hour period. And that, I thought that was a great space to share the sketches. And the more I did it, the more elaborate these things. Sometimes I spend, like an hour writing out step by step. And then I started shooting some videos of me actually executing some of the pieces. And lots of people encouraged me to keep doing this. And, a lot of it, I honestly say, is motivated by these exchanges that I have with folks around the work. And this communal dynamic is really important to me. And I am just as surprised as anybody else that I can say Instagram or Facebook to a degree had facilitated this. But you know what? I bet you I wouldn't be here talking to you today if it weren't for my Facebook posts and Richard seeing the images there. And that's literally that simple. And with the lockdown being the reality for such a long time, we all took to social media or ways of communicating with each other, through our phones. That's why there's so many phones in these drawings. So if we had this conversation, last year, and you told me, so Peter, you're going to do this massive project for months, and it's all going to be on Facebook and Instagram only, I would laugh. I would just say, that's crazy talk. There's no way that I'm going to be doing this. But that's what happened. And it felt like not only the right place for it. I mean, it was the only place for it, and it felt like the right place for it in the end. And part of it, in retrospect, was for me to kind of reclaim some element of that social media space as a public space. I know that it's a very complicated public space these days, right? It's heavily controlled, manipulated. There's so much crap everywhere. It is really difficult to wade through all of this. It's messy and littered in profound ways, right? But like street could feel this way too. There is an element of that public space where the poster language actually thrives. And so in some ways, I actually see it like that. So it's no different, or at least in some ways, not that different from posting these posters on these electrical boxes in Baltimore. So that street presentation and this Instagram on the other side, to me, feel like kind of a equivalence in some ways.
So we're getting close to our 7:30 cutoff point, but I'd see there's one other question that's come in so far. So maybe we'll give you one more question and
Sure.
Any final thoughts. The question is that a strong ongoing theme in your work seems to involve various forms of folding the process of making the art into the art itself.
Yes, true.
Often in a performative aspect. At
Yes.
what point did you realize with the Daily Report series that this was a performative display of the process, and how has that guided the work?
Wow, what a great question. The only thing that I cringe a little bit is the word performative, because it had been it comes now with its own baggage, right? Like the performative allyship, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important. It's important to understand that phenomenon and to acknowledge its existence in that really complex space of negotiating identities, the racial backdrop, or specifically the way that the race had been an issue or profound presence in the history of this country, many other countries, but here we are, and the acknowledging that and coming to terms with that is a big part of the uprising and the reckoning that it brings yet again. So yeah, so the performative, right? I mean, but it's true. It is so true. Process is huge. I'm very much aware of all of that, and yeah, I'm glad that made its way to the question, because obviously somebody was seeing that in some of the examples of the work that I was showing before. And yes, I'm very much aware of this, and this is kind of why I said earlier that I do think that the project as a whole, the series, however long it will last, is one work, right? I mean, yes, each drawing is its own thing, and it needs to be formulated and resolved and address a particular set of ideas or layers of ideas, whatever. Some of this gets crazy, like into tangles of issues, and we could have a whole other couple of hours of discussion of picking some of those and just talking about specific individual designs, and I'd love to do that, but we don't have the time for 175 designs, right? So that's why I say that I'm sort of tending to this one giant work, and it is a kind of very particular but very specific work that needs to happen, and it really, in a way, answers the earlier question that was asked, which is why are you sharing all these other things? Well, those other things are helping to articulate that part of the process, that this is like a labor of like a maintenance to this project. Each day there is a new explosion of some kind happening, and the work needs to be like recalibrated a little bit, because the impact might have shifted things a little bit, and I got to tweak it a little bit. It needs to understand what just happened, so that in totality it could retain its presence and relevance to what happens in the world right now. That's what the project really is, right? And it needs that tweaking. I'm still here to do it. I can prune, I can trim, I can water things as they need to be taken care of, or oil things if that's the part that needs to be addressed. So yeah, there's a kind of a service element to this that I mentioned with the banner project as well.
All right, that's great. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We are almost at 7:30. For anyone who isn't doing so already, as you hear, this project exists in the virtual space of Instagram and Facebook. And so I encourage you guys to all check that out, and you can comment on or share these things as well and be part of this ongoing dialogue.
Speaking of, can I say one more thing though?
Of course.
So if you do go on Instagram and if you follow the project, if you wanted to ask a question, or maybe you asked a question here and I didn't get to answer it, if you message me on Instagram, I will answer your questions. I am yet to reach the point where I can't keep up. So I am very much interested in what you might have to say or questions you might want to ask. I'll entertain anything.
Fantastic. All right. Again, I'd really like to thank you for your time. That was an excellent, fascinating presentation, and we had great turnout, and a lot of people seem to be really appreciating. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And if we were in the auditorium, we would all clap. I guess we can put little clap emojis up or something.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much once again.